The Jewish culture and religion has made a significant impact on Budapest popular culture of today, despite being one of their ethnic minorities. To gain more information, we went on a walking tour of the Jewish Quarter where we learned about the history and cultural impact that surrounds the Jewish community to make Budapest what it is today. When the Jewish people first settled in Budapest, they placed themselves near the main market by Elizabeth Square because they were most often merchants and traders. This also helped the Jewish people form good relationships with the Hungarians, who were Christians. Because the Hungarian Christians believed money was impure, therefore Christians let the Jewish people be in charge of finances. The Austrian Habsburgs monarchy took control of Hungary and Budapest, and they're responsible for reorganizing the city. The Jewish people then congregated in the area, what is now known today as the Jewish Quarter. One of their main buildings was destroyed by the Habsburgs in order to show the Hungarians' hatred of the Jewish people.
This hatred and discrimination continued for many years and intensified after World War I because although the Jewish people were a minority in Hungary, they still had some political power, but not enough to take control. However, because the Jewish people were richer and had some political power, they were blamed for the loss of World War I. This caused Hungary to take action against the Jews in the form of numerous clauses. Such examples include limiting education, as in only 7% of representation could be allowed in each school, and made laws prohibiting mixed religious marriages and limiting their number in the economic sphere.
The 1940s is when Hungary started putting the Jewish people into ghettos and deporting them. Hungary was so effective at deportation that Auschwitz-Birkenau had to be expanded to fit all of the Hungarian Jews that were sent there. Approximately 10,000 people died in the ghetto before it was liberated in 1945. The Red Army came to Budapest with the intent of liberating the Jews, which caused the Nazis to panic. This is when the Nazis started to randomly collect Jewish people off the streets and shoot them into the Danube River. The memorial, called Shoes on the Danube, was to commemorate this tragic event in Hungary. There are 60 pairs of shoes in the memorial to observe the 60th anniversary.
The impact of the Holocaust and World War II can still be seen today with the low percentage of Jewish people in Hungary, and the amount of people actively practicing the Jewish religion is even lower. Today, there are about 100,000 Jews in Hungary, but the majority of the Jewish community are just culturally Jewish and don't practice the religion. The different sects of Judaism are represented through the different synagogues in the Jewish Quarter. The way to identify a synagogue is to look for the 10 Commandments displayed on top in Hebrew. The Great Synagogue is the second largest in the world and follows Neolog Judaism. However, it is not recognized by Orthodox Jews. One of the most controversial aspects is that the Great Synagogue is not shaped like an octagon and has a cemetery inside, because after World War II, the Red Army buried those who died in the ghetto in the synagogue. In Judaism, synagogues cannot be built next to a cemetery, and bodies cannot be reburied after 24 hours. Therefore, the cemetery inside can never be moved, and the Orthodox Jews will never go inside because of these conflicts with their own beliefs.
The Orthodox Jewish sect follows the older traditions of Judaism, such as only eating kosher meals and dressing modestly. On our tour of the Jewish Quarter, we visited these synagogues, and our tour guide informed us that even though there has been no attacks against the synagogues or the community, anti-Semitism is still a threat in Budapest today.
Of how the Jewish Quarter has become the cultural and tourist staple it is today, with the famous room bars being a prime example. After World War II, the Jewish Quarter buildings were in poor condition and practically in shambles. Because these buildings were in such poor conditions, the buildings were able to be rented and sold at lower prices. For example, the people who rented one of these buildings brought in their own furniture and made their own artwork and decorations and created the famous ruin bar called Simple, which is the first ruin bar. The creation and success of Simple led to more ruin bars being created around the Jewish Quarter.
They found value in the old buildings and wanted to renovate them rather than tear them down to build new ones. This is an example of how the Jewish community was resilient after the war. This bears a resemblance to the metallic waste regime from 1948 to 1974 in Hungary. Susa Gil mentions in her ethnography that during the metallic waste regime, they hailed all garbage and byproducts as free materials to be mobilized for the fulfillment of the plan. This is the opposite of today, where there has been this rise of a throwaway culture. This is another example of how the past affected their decisions. There is this dichotomy of past versus present.
The past was a time when the politics of waste disposal was something taboo, but today environmental issues and the politics have opened up and are able to be discussed. Gill also mentions that waste issues always involve the guarding or the breaking down of certain boundaries. The first boundary that broke down with the waste of the Jewish quarter is when the occupants started renting their buildings to investors and outsiders of the Jewish community. This was no longer a space for only the Jewish community. This boundary continues to be broken today when we look at the Jewish quarter as a space for partying and for foreigners. The waste of the past has opened up the Jewish quarter as a space for all.
This topic is brought up in Mary Gluck's journal article, where she says that membership in Jewish Budapest was inclusive, accessible to everyone who cared to be identified with the metropolitan way of life. The initiates of the new culture were defined not by common religion, but by a common sensibility, vocabulary, and references, created and reinforced by ongoing face-to-face relations in the coffee houses, the boulevards, the music halls, and the editorial offices of the city. The distinctive voice of Jewish Budapest was informal and ironic, fragmented and elliptical, characterized by multiple meanings. There is thus no single coherent narrative of Jewish Budapest, but rather multiple stories, told alternately by the creators and consumers of popular culture, who were deeply implicated with each other.
Our tour guide did not want to be filmed, but when we asked him about the impacts of the ruin bars on the Jewish community, he said,
I asked my friend who is Jewish this question, and he said it's not a negative thing, because the Jewish people are the ones renting out the buildings and making a profit.
When asked about the tourism and newer developments, his response was,
the Jewish community wanted these renovations to make their district lively and colorful again. They didn't want the quarter to remain sad and gloomy.
This can be displayed by the colorful murals on the sides of the buildings, the many restaurants, stores, cafes, and food trucks. However, because of the tourism and popularity of the ruin bars, this has also caused a few negative aspects of the Jewish quarter. The prices of living have increased dramatically over the years because of hostels and Airbnbs appearing. Currently, there are over 8,000 Airbnbs in the Jewish quarter.
The Jewish quarter has a tragic history, especially with the painful period of the Holocaust. However, the Jewish community, although diminished in numbers, have managed to turn the Jewish quarter from a sad, poor part of Budapest into one of the most prominent tourist locations in Hungary and Europe.